Lynn.
Welcome. Stacey Henry is our featured speaker tonight, and Stacey and I met a couple decades ago when we co-led book fairs and teacher appreciation lunches at our son's school, Harlan Elementary. We stayed in touch and leaned on each other occasionally ever since. Stacey even has a history with our church. I had recruited her as a volunteer greeter when we hosted Father Boyle. Way back when. Stacey is a Delaware native and former MBNA executive. She was with MBNA for almost 20 years. She's held various positions in education, government, and community relations, and is the founder of a nonprofit, Brandywine Valley Friends. She retired in 2020. Stacey is married with 4 adult children and 4 grandchildren, and she enjoys serving the less fortunate and organizing policies for change. And it is that passion that got Stacey involved in reaching out to help the victims of Hurricane Ida, or the remnants of Hurricane Ida, when it came through Wilmington and flooded out a segment of our city. So with that, I will let Stacey talk to you about her efforts, both with the folks who became homeless due to Hurricane Ida, as well as more recently, the condemnation of an apartment building, which led to the unexpected eviction of a large number of folks on Adams Street. And both of those were emergencies that left a large number of people homeless. And as folks within our church know, that we have also wanted to support those efforts and have provided some funding through the Friendship House. So we're grateful to have Kim Eppehimer here as well, representing Friendship House, which is where we have donated some crisis funds to be used to help such things that Stacey has been diving into on her own and coordinating the community to make things happy. So Stacey, please take it away.
Well, good evening, good evening, good evening. I think it's just ladies, or maybe ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for inviting me to join your group. I'm very excited about the opportunities to share. As Lynn said earlier, we met a long time ago. Our kids were little, and we kind of stayed in touch because it was important for us to do so. Well, I guess I can start out by kind of telling you a little story. Well, it's my story. The hurricane that we had September 2nd, 2021 was a flood that I received a phone call from a friend who had a family member with some small children in the area that she could not get to or get near to check on them. And when I received the phone call, it probably was about 7:30, 7:45 in the morning, which was very early, but I jumped in my van and I drove towards the flood. I was able to get to the flood close enough to help rescue this family. It was a father, a mother, and 4 small children. But within minutes, there was a lot of water coming down the street. I mean, to the point where I drive a minivan, and my minivan, after stuffing the kids in and the family in, my minivan, literally, you couldn't open the door because the water was rising so quickly. And I drove to what I thought was a safe spot, but we kind of looked behind us and you could just see the water and the trash cans and the cars and everything kind of just raging down behind us. So I just kept driving where I knew it would be somewhere close. By that time, there were ambulance, there were, I guess, no boats yet, but there were ambulance, there were police, and people just trying to figure out what to do to get the people away from the water. To make a long story short, that morning went on, it seemed like forever. So finally, there was some organization where we were told where to take the people. Some said, take them to this place. Some say, take them to that place, but it was very disorganized. So we went over to the PAL Center in Wilmington. There we met a director and a Red Cross volunteer, still not a lot of communication about what to do. It seemed to me that there was no direction because I don't think they really ever expected us to have a disaster like that. So it was kind of very confusing on what do we do next. I asked a million times, and I started making phone calls to the mayor's office, the governor's office, whoever, because the folks were just there. They were wet, they were cold, they were hungry, and still no organization from anyone. So this went on for hours. And finally, I asked one of the volunteer representatives, look, what can I do? These people need help. And they're like, well, we're trying to figure it out. You can be a volunteer and help the people communicate between us and them because they're upset and you seem to be able to talk to them. And I was like, okay, but what does that mean? Hours have gone by. So long story short, I called people, we got Pampers, we got baby food bottles, we tried to get some dry clothes and so forth and so on. I actually reached out to one of our representatives, Lizzie Lockman. She came in or she called, I'm not sure which. And she said, what can I do? I said, I need Pampers, I need bottles, I need milk or whatever. So we kind of did our own little thing for the moment. Night fell and there was no place for these people to go but the PAL with no food, nowhere to sleep, no dry clothes or whatever. So the Red Cross said, we're closing the shelter. And I was like, you can't close the shelter. These people have nowhere to go. So anyway, they closed the shelter. People went out on the street, walking around, sleeping in cars, just doing whatever they could do. And in that moment, I knew that there had to be a better way to handle a disaster. I'm not an expert. I never did this before, but what I saw and what I heard was total chaos, and it was not acceptable. These were human lives that were put back out into a traumatizing situation that they just came out of with no support. Day 2 came, phones were ringing. I mean, I know I called the governor's office probably 100 times that day, but little did they know there were other people that were kind of concerned too. So they reopened the PAL for one day. Again, night fell and they closed the shelter. People know where to go. So finally, folks got shipped out to the Hope Center and to several different hotels. Still no organization of who's going where or what. Just show up. And if we have space for you, we'll take you in. So folks did go to the hotels and the shelters. They stayed there for months. I would visit every day, the Hope Center, the hotels, trying to find out who's in charge, who's organizing. Still nobody. The folks that stayed in their community because their house was quote unquote semi-habitable, they needed disinfect, they needed gloves, they needed things so that they could stay in their homes because they didn't want to stay in their cars or in shelters. So again, I kept asking, where is the person or the group or whatever? Little by little, for the folks that stayed in the community, they had volunteers coming. We did a huge volunteer effort to bring everything possible that you would need in a disaster, from sheets, towels, clothes, canned goods, water, Pampers, or whatever. We had the stuff out in the field. We told the residents, come get what you need. No matter how much it is, take what you need. The problem with that is we have people in shelters and people in hotels that couldn't get to the field to get the things. So there was an article in the paper when I was trying to help the family with the little babies. Little did I know my phone number, my name was publicized. When that was publicized, the phone rang off the hook. Lynn was one. She called and she's like, this must be the Stacey Henry that I know. And I said, depends on who's asking. And she said, well, it's Lynn. And we went on and we went on. More people called, dozens of people called. So I got a shed. I had a shed that was doing well. It was my son's shed. And I convinced him to give me the shed because everyone wanted to continue to give the necessities that these people needed. And things were coming by the box, by the Amazon truckloads. And I would visit the hotels, I would visit the shelter, and any place else that I knew of where the people were staying to make sure they had the necessities to go on. This went on for months and months. And every day I was calling, I was begging the state, I was begging the governors, I was begging the mayors. Somebody has to take control of this. This is not, normal life for these people. So I was the advocate that would go to people, and people would get mad at me because I would bring them the truth of how the folks were being left at the hotel without any supports. There was one large apartment building that was owned by a developer here in Wilmington. They did pay for the hotel stay. It happened in September. October 15th, they came and they said, sign this piece of paper. Here's your security deposit and a couple more hundred or whatever. Go on your way, because we're not paying for your hotel anymore. So the red flags went up again. I said, absolutely not. You cannot put these people out. They have nowhere to go. So I fought and I fought and I fought for additional hotel stays, more rooms at the shelters. And then from sun up to sundown, I would make sure that I got applications. I met with apartment owners, anyone that could help me get the people out of the shelters, out of the hotels, into permanent housing. That was very successful over months. It didn't happen overnight, but it was a journey that I had to travel, and almost alone. There was a forum that did develop with all of the state workers and some community center EDs, and we would meet, and HUD and FEMA, we would meet and meet and meet. And the only housing that was happening was the housing that I was supporting to help people come out of homelessness. And today, out of the 23 families that were homeless for the longest, there's only one handicapped a young lady who's still in the hotel today. And there's 2 other families, because they didn't meet the income guidelines, they weren't able to move into affordable housing. So I'm still working with them, just supporting them, meeting with them, feeding them, whatever I need to do. And then Adams Street happened on May 15th, where another 20-some families were evicted without any notice and just put out on the street. The mayor was there. Several other politicians were there. Nobody knew what to do. It was like, no, this is not happening again. We cannot be that, and I'm going to use this word, we cannot be that stupid to not have an emergency plan when folks are being evicted. We cannot go through this again. We just went through it. What is the problem? So what I did differently this time, as opposed to Ida, because I had to go through another learning curve, but I arrived the day that the folks were evicted from Adams Street. I took names and phone numbers. I introduced myself. I gave them my name and number. And then I set up an emergency command center. It's virtual. And the only way I set this up is with the resident that was evicted and everyone that was living in the apartment, their unit, and their phone number. And I communicated with them by text. And they could call that number, they could leave a message, they could text, whatever their situation was. Within 2 weeks, I believe, I was able to organize another caravan of volunteers who we rented moving trucks. We secured storage for 3 months. We dropped off packing material for them to get their personal belongings out of the Adams Street apartments, because the landlord was not assisting them with anything. Now, these folks are, again, some of them are at the Hope Center, where the shelter, some of them are at a very, very ran down motel in Wilmington, and then a few of them are just out there. But for the ones that had no resources to move their things, we got a volunteer group with Kim and her husband and Lynn and folks that I just put it out there. This is what we need. We all showed up. We helped them move their things to storage. We paid for the storage for 3 months, which this month is the last month. And their things were secured so that they wouldn't lose the little bit that they had left. The building had roofs caving in where animals had ate through the roofs, water damage, mold, mildew, and anything else you could name in those apartment buildings. They were falling down not only from structural issues, but also from the rodents that it had invaded those buildings. Right now, those families are still displaced, and we've been in contact with several politicians. We've been in contact with DHSS, who is the organization, the government agency that's supposed to be case managing these residents like they were supposed to with Ida, and they didn't. And we're forcing them to support the folks. They're at a motel with no food. Some days they have nothing. Some days they might get something from the food bank that's in a can. Some of them have high blood pressure, diabetes, or whatever. They're on restrictive diets. They can't eat canned food. We've talked to everyone that would listen about why this system is so broken. And the folks are being put through more trauma every day, from housing to where they lay their head, to what they're going to eat or what they're going to wear or how they're going to wash their clothes, transportation. It's just a lot. But I don't know how or why I was called to help these people, and I don't question it anymore. The support that I have now, and I will continue to have with Friendship House, with Len and your church supporting Friendship House for some of the things that the families need. Every day, we just work through individual challenges, just to make sure the folks know that they're not alone. And now, with that being said, I'm sure there's probably more, but I've been talking for about 15 minutes. I would like to hear from anyone on the call, any question, any comment or concern that they may have, and hopefully I can answer it, or I can confirm, or we could just discuss, because sometimes I talk to Lynn for hours and I talk to Kim for hours because I don't have a manual for what I'm doing. It's just the grace of God that every day I wake up and I say, whatever is coming, Lord, just give me strength to be able to listen, to hear, and try to provide an answer. Uh-oh. Did I lose you guys?
No, we're all still here taking it all
okay.
in. I mean, for me, it has been such a learning experience. I mean, hearing the stories in real time as Stacey would be explaining what the folks were going through, not only what they were going through, but the lack of response from those who I would have thought would be in charge, our government agencies and things. Their inability to manage a crisis and to be able to provide what these folks really needed. And to me, it was a real disappointment. I thought we were better than that. I don't know how else to say it. I would even make some calls myself and talk to folks, and there were lots of reasons and excuses, and but that agency they're not really responsible for that. That's they start pointing like this. You talk to one place and they say, well, no, we do just this little piece, but it's that other agency that does that. And no, it's that other group. And a lot of pointing with no one really feeling fully responsible was, in my opinion, a big part of the problem. But I would love to have Kim add on her perspective as well, because Friendship House was also there trying to help and do what they can. This was not the typical population that they work with. But again, Kim and Friendship House, being who they are, wanted to support and help however they could. So Kim, you want to add on?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It is so nice to see your face, Stacey. I miss you. We need to schedule some time together soon. So just a few days after Ida hit, I started to see what Stacey was experiencing, and that was a lack of people stepping up to help. And so I made some calls, I sent emails inquiring what's being done, and it was met with a lot of silence. I wasn't finding answers, which made me very nervous. So I decided, okay, if no one's helping, we need to help. And so I sent a different set of emails and a different set of phone calls asking for funding, knowing that these folks are going to need financial help, whether it is to help pay for hotels, help to get them into a new place, replace personal belongings. We knew that would be a significant issue. And as you all know, Friendship House is in a good spot to be nimble, be flexible. And since we don't do government funding, it allows us to really help in a way that we can help best to help the person move forward. So very quickly, we were awarded funding from Highmark, which is great. And in that journey, it also reached out to Westminster, Christchurch, and a couple of other faith communities. And Christchurch and Westminster were very responsive. Like, we want to help you. We had many gift cards show up at our doorstep. We had promises of funding. So then I needed to contact people. Well, how do I get hold of the folks who are actually suffering? I knew some people at the Hope Center, and I knew people were going to be at hotels, but we were having a hard time getting a list. And now I realize it's because nobody had that list. Nobody knew who these people were. We got a call to our clothing bank that somebody was looking for clothing to help people who are affected by flooding. And very quickly, I learned it was a woman named Stacey Henry who was referred to us by Lynn Keelhorn. I'm like, this is our answer. So we forced our way into Stacey's lives, explained our situation, and said, we have the money, you have the people, we can make this work. And so she coordinated many efforts. Our center, our Wilmington Center, and our caseworkers tried very hard to work with her to get these folks what they needed. So we have helped get personal items. We helped fill Stacey's son's shed with stuff. And we've helped to reimburse some of her costs that she has put out personally for these individuals, as well as pay some hotel stays for folks. So that was all just Hurricane Ida. And as Stacey said, when the Adams Street apartment crisis happened, it didn't take us more than a second to say, here we go again. And we were there right alongside Stacey to help these folks do exactly what they needed next. And that's to have a loving, supportive community be there to ensure that they were told, you are not forgotten. The city let you down. This landlord let you down. The state is letting you down. We will not let you down. And so fortunately, we had funding. We got additional funding from Westminster to support these folks. And it is critical that we're able to do that. And now, unfortunately, we're facing another crisis as 436 households are losing funding at the end of this month because the pandemic funding that has sheltered these folks in hotels is ending. And so once again, we're stepping in. I've been on the phone all day today, emails all day today. We can't let these folks down. What can we do to help? So in weird ways that I wish it hadn't happened this way, I think Friendship House is sort of becoming this agency that is able to help with crises in our state, even though that's not what our mission is. But our mission is to ensure that people feel loved and supported. And that is what we are committed to doing. So I'm grateful for Lynn. I'm grateful for Stacey that we've been able to be part of this journey. I wish it was through other means. But it's so great that we have an organization that is this nimble, because Stacey will tell you, nobody else was there.
Nobody.
Wow.
No. I think when I met Kim and Lynn had been listening to me for hours, for days, and I met Kim and we started to talk immediately, it was like a load lifted, because I just could not understand how our government didn't see the urgency for the people. And Kim didn't go through a whole FBI check and everything for each person. And these lists that they were talking about supposedly we have an emergency management person that's supposed to be on site for emergencies that collects the data that you need to collect the people. I kept getting calls saying, can you help us reach the people, or can you give us the list? I'm just a volunteer who is doing the right thing. And supposedly there are people, this is their job. And I kept questioning, how can you not reach the people? When I talk to the people every day, I knew none of these residents from Ida or from Adams. I knew none of them prior to their disaster. But if I could reach them through text, through email, in person, a lot of what I did on Ida was in person because I didn't have the emergency management command center set up because I didn't know I needed to do that. I was assuming the state and the agencies would set that up, but they didn't. To this day, there's still a question about how many and who was affected by Ida and by Adams. There is still no concrete list that the government has.
Wow.
I've given them all my information and hope with the hope that they were going to do the right thing, but they still haven't.
Wow.
So I have a question in my naivete. First of all, I'm so grateful to Stacey and Kim for doing what they've been able to do. But I've always understood that there's a 211 number, that emergency homeless number that people can call. And now what you're saying is there isn't a system for responding.
There is a 211, and if you were to ask any resident from Ida or Adams what 211 has done for them, and they will probably tell you literally nothing. There is a 211, and usually you get a person or leave a message or a referral to DHSS or just a number where there's no resources for you there. As we said before with Adams, they were supposed to contact 211 and there was supposed to be a representative from the mayor's office who was supposed to support these folks. None of that's happening. It's not happening. They're, like Lynn was saying earlier, everybody's point, go over there. And then when you get there, no, go over there. And then when you get there, no, go back there. So everyone is just pointing and saying, sending the people a wild goose chase, but there's no results happening.
To kind of expand more on that, and this is being recorded, so I will choose my words carefully. So 211 is designed to be essentially a referral and resource center phone number. If you are in need of any kind of emergency service that's not 911, right, or it's not mental health, you're to call 211, and then they're supposed to connect you, give you phone numbers, help you navigate the system. That was the original design, from my understanding. I was not there when it was created. And it is overwhelmed, and it is overused, and it has become much more inefficient for those reasons. There's also 1833 Find Bed, which is run by the Housing Alliance Delaware, which is a similar system, except they really focus on shelter beds. So you call that number and they are supposed to have their thumb on all available shelter beds that require a referral. And if you accept government funding for your shelter, you must have a referral from 1833 Find Bed. That's the short answer. It's not that simple. It's a little more complicated. And because there are little to no shelter beds available, calling that number is not going to get you very far. And that's why this is happening, because their default is, well, we'll put you on the wait list. In the meantime, call 211. And 211 is like, well, here are some resources, call 1833 Find Bed for shelter. If you are fortunate and you qualify for a hotel or motel voucher, you will be told to go to your state service center, which again is not an easy thing. And you'll be, again, directed in several different ways and told different things. But that is the ultimate goal for many people is you can't have a shelter, so we'll give you a motel hotel voucher to get a few days, week, up to 4 weeks of services. So right now, I think the poor, easy answer is our system is overwhelmed, overused, and has become more inefficient.
And to add to the 211 referral for the 1-800 find a bed, get a voucher, or get something to go into a shelter. The night of Adam's eviction, the chaos was so bad. Some people went to the Hope Center. Some people went to a hotel that was known to be partnership with homelessness through the state. The folks arrived at the motel. The motel knew nothing about them coming after they were told by folks at the location of the eviction to go there. So there was a civilian there with us who paid for 10 rooms the first night out of her own pocket, because we had these people here with their children. It's 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. They have nowhere to go. Phone calls were made early that next morning, and the state did pick up the tab, and they're there. But again, when emergency happens, the coordination of a national disaster versus an eviction, the national disaster, we didn't know how bad it was going to be or whatever, but once it was determined it was bad, the onset of helping people was not coordinated and wasn't done well at all. Mm-hmm. The same thing that happened with the Adams Street eviction. If we were going to evict 60 people into the street, the partnership with the state agencies or community centers or 100 Get a Bed or Red Cross or whatever should have been on site to address the issue that these people are in the street and have nowhere to go. And that's all I'm saying. Any disaster, there is no coordination of emergency management to address the people. They addressed the building. They locked it up, put signs on it, had the police protecting the building. But nobody did anything for the people until after hours and hours. And then they still were split up and arrived at a location and no one knew they were coming.
And so I'm anxious that we're going to see this again. So I don't know if you all have heard, but there is pandemic funding that is ending. And I just referred to it a little bit ago. There are 436 households who are in hotels across our state. And the funding that has been putting them in those hotels is ending August 31st. So the state service centers have put out a notice to their partners because they expect that this is going to cause an influx of ask of services from all of these partners. And through a couple of phone calls, it was quickly learned that there is no action plan in place. There will be resource fairs. There's a helpline number. The state service center caseworkers are dedicated to be there to help try to guide them, but there is no statewide coordinated effort to help these folks. And so I have spent all day today trying to start this coordinated effort, and it appears that it's likely Friendship House will be the coordinated agency trying to connect these folks to services. And I'm happy to be able to do it. We're desperately finding funding so we can hire caseworkers to have them in every single county so we can do this. But is that what we're becoming? We are an agency that fills gaps. That is what we are known to do. And Stacey has pointed out so eloquently the lack of emergency help that this state has, and for such a small state, it's difficulty in navigating through crises. And so we're going to fill that gap for the moment, but I can't say that is the state's long-term answer. And we are good at what we do. We'll be good at doing this. And if we continue to do that, we will not be holding them accountable. And I think it's really important we find a way to include them in that. Our state is very dependent on nonprofits human social service agencies to continue to be that lifeline for people. And so if that's what they want in crises, well, they have to have a coordinated effort between these agencies or find a way to say, you know what, we're not going to do it. We will let XYZ agency do it. And then we have to make sure that that agency is held accountable. There is not an accountable system for this. And it is overwhelming. It is terrifying, and people's lives are at risk.
And I guess, again, and just like you said, Kim, when this happened, I was just surprised that I was cooking dinner for 60 people 7 days a week and sharing this information with our state agency, who was supposed to be case managing the folks that I was literally personally cooking for, and had other people helping to make sure that the folks ate. Like, I don't understand like how we as individuals can do so much more, but our state continues to shut the door as if it's not happening. And they know it's happening because it was publicized through forums, it was publicized through the news, it was publicized by me. I sat on meetings with the Deputy Director of Health and Social Services and the Secretary of Health and Social Services, and laid it out plain what was happening. So this is not something that they don't know is happening, but it's folks like myself who are taking up the slack. And when we can't do it anymore, or it's too overwhelming for agencies like Friendship House or myself, what do? We're in a state crisis. The end of this month, Ida and Adams is going to be small things to 400 and some people that have nowhere to go. All at once.
Sorry, Kim and Stacey, where should this responsibility lie? Is there an entity that exists that should be the focal point for this?
Well, what we've been told through many conversations is that our Delaware State Health and Social Services has case managers that are supposed to be navigating the system for referrals or whatever for these people. And we know that's still a major concern. Just today and yesterday, my partner and I had to do a 3-way call with a gentleman from Adams Street who has gone to the State Service Center many times. He has no food stamp card. He has no medical card. This man can barely walk. He needs help. And until we got on a 3-way call after lots of resistance, we demand that the caseworker help him fill out the application. He was there in person, fill out the application, process his food stamp card, and get him his medical card so he can get medical attention. It's been weeks he's been trying to do it on his own. And until we did that, they were doing nothing. Nothing. Basically sending people away. I've had people that end up living in the woods after one of the hurricane disaster and kept going to the state service and being sent away. And that's another thing. They make the referrals through 211, but if you don't qualify for food stamps or a medical card or whatever, say you have a job, make a minimum wage. You may make $2 too much. So you don't qualify for any services through State Service Center, so you don't even get processed for any referrals for housing. You're basically told there's nothing we can do for you. We had our city council put through order to donate $13,000 to support the Adams Street residents with their basic needs or whatever. We don't know how or where that money's going because the residents that are at the motel haven't been supported with that. like I said, their storage was paid for 90 days. September 1, they have to make payments or their stuff is going to be sold or discarded of if they don't pay for it. And we've asked for support through the money that you donated for the residents. If the state social services can't pay for their storage, this money that was funded through city council, who said they can't directly pay for their storage, or they can't give it to someone to pay for their storage. Help the people. Help the people. Each night they lay down and they go to, some of them don't have a job because of medical issues or whatever. Some of them do work part-time. Some of them are on disability. They all walks of life. But the bottom line is having case management to navigate the systems for food disparities, health needs, and the ultimate is an exit plan of homelessness to include, see you guys later, to include housing, affordable housing. And yes, we have an affordable housing prices all over the United States. But for it to continue to say there is no housing, there is no housing. And I'm not patting myself on the back, single-handedly help 22 residents from Ida get into affordable housing by lots of phone calls, physical visits to the apartment buildings, and navigating the paperwork and the red tape. All the way down to getting a truck to move their things out of storage and to move into their new homes. It was hard work, but it has to be done. And they need the support to do it.
Going back to the question of who's responsible, I mean, I think ultimately the problem is that no one's willing to really, take that, be accountable for that. There is a person at the state level for emergency response. And to me, that's ultimately, who should be in the driver's seat and coordinating emergency response for any of these types of emergencies. Granted, given that we were still in a COVID emergency, a lot of that person's time and energies were still focused on COVID. So I think that may be part of an explanation. But to me, that's where we should be looking for a plan and leadership. The problem is that, yes, in the end, when it's an emergency that involves people that need help, they end up saying, well, DHSS, you keep hearing us say, that's the Department of Health and Social Services. And the Department of Health and Social Services is focused on that. They are the ones that run, the food stamp programs and those other types of assistance that many of these folks need. They do not know much about housing. They are not the ones that can help someone find, whether it's,
they ought to know somebody who does.
Maybe. And they do have the ability to issue the short-term vouchers for hotels. They do have ability to do some short-term stuff and whatever, but they're not the ones who are going to be able to do the level of case management that is required to assist someone to getting into permanent affordable housing. That's the missing link in these. And that is what Stacey's hand-holding was doing. She was working with folks, taking them through the process of not only all the paperwork and things that you have to navigate to try to achieve affordable housing, but also having to find a specific place, a landlord or an actual facility who will accept all the, whether it's the vouchers or the DHAP or whatever type of funding stuff. You have to find an actual place that will accept that. And as far as I can tell, there is no entity out there that is doing that level of assisting someone through the process. And that's a big gap. And that gap is not just for these specific emergencies, but it's a more general gap in the system for folks who are trying to navigate a recovery from homelessness, whatever put them there, to permanent affordable housing.
Yes, I agree completely with what Lynn said, coupled with the issue of how, and not making this an opinion, trying to make just more information on this, but it's how our state also manages its HUD funding. And we put a lot of money into rapid rehousing funding, which is helpful, but that's become a bit of a stopgap, and it's not designed for everybody. And they're using it for a lot more people than what it's really originally designed for. So we put a lot of emphasis on certain programs, and then there's agencies that apply for that funding, and then they focus on using that funding to help people get into different levels of affordable housing. Where one of the benefits to what Stacey was doing was none of that was there. Nothing she did was reflective of, well, do you fit this program? Do we have money in this bucket to do that? It's just a true advocate and friend who fought through the system and wouldn't accept no. And Lynn's right, there aren't agencies that have the time, resources, ability to do that. We do that in our transitional housing program. It's a similar style and format that we do, but it's, again, we're not tied to certain programmatic money, right? And that's what a lot of the things are, is you're kind of bucketed into this program. And if the landlords won't accept that, okay, you kind of are a little bit stuck. So it's a very complicated system, and it shouldn't be. And I think, unfortunately, the way that we have chosen as a state to handle a lot of our funding sources and how it's disseminated out, I think that is one of the challenges we need to think about. And it should be considered at a higher level of overhaul on what actually can we do? Where do we want to put our funding? How can it be utilized to be really efficient?
Efficient understanding also through the housing search. There are many challenges, folks that are evicted and or already living in subsidized housing, because there were several rejections from the subsidized housing that we helped some of the residents apply for, and we had to appeal that. We had to appeal the decision. I mean, when you're looking for subsidized housing, you go through a whole criminal background check, and there's a lot of things you have to go through to be accepted. And if any of those things don't check off, you can be denied. But through true advocacy and supporting the residents with how to appeal a decision, that was something else that needed to be done. And when we hit a hurdle, it wasn't a hurdle that, oh, we can't do anything about it. There is something or somewhere or someone that can help the person. Now, who is going to be that agency that's going to start and get them to the finish? Not say, oh, we gave them a list. That's one thing DHSS does. They give them a list of apartments for rent. You have someone on Social Security disability, their check's $800, and the cheapest apartment that you have on your list is $1,100. Why would you give them that list? What pre-assessment or what research did you do before you gave them that list? No, they're not going to qualify for any of that. And you have to understand, if you're doing case management, it's individually based. It's not everyone in Adams Street was paying rent, so everyone in Adams Street should be able to get an apartment off this list. That's not true. There was a couple of residents, two people living in a one-bedroom apartment, sharing a one-bedroom apartment with very limited income. That's all they could afford. So that particular landlord said, just give me your money and you can stay here. Two people didn't know each other, complete strangers. But it was sleep outside on the curb or sleep with this complete stranger and take the little bit of money that you have and pay your rent. Even
I
if
have another question.
Yeah.
Just for my own information, was Family Promise involved in any of this process, Stacey? Did you get any help from Family Promise?
Okay, let me tell you about Family Promise.
I know there are hoops for that too, but I just, I'd like to know how they were involved.
Okay, originally, no, because Family Promise, like some of the other agencies that help people, everyone's overwhelmed. They have a waiting list or the waiting list is closed. I'm currently working with 2 residents who lived in Claymont Street apartments from Ida. Their paperwork was not up to date. So when they left or was evicted or whatever from the flood, they couldn't take their voucher and move into another place. So one young lady's still there because she doesn't have enough money to live anyplace else. And her voucher, 811 voucher, was how she was paying her rent at the Claymont Street apartments. Another young lady, we found her a place. She applied for DHAP, which is the rental assistance program. They are currently paying her rent, but I'm working with her family promise counselor today, yesterday, to get to the director of Delaware State Housing Authority to say, here's the issue. And because she was a part of a national disaster, I know your waiting list is closed, but she had a voucher and her paperwork got mishandled during the flood. And we need her voucher to be reactivated. So I'm working with 2 family promise counselors now for 2 different people. But like I said, the folks who have the funding to open up a new case, they don't have any spots open right now. So when their paperwork lapsed because of the flood, their spots were given to someone else. So now I'm pleading with the executive directors who handle the vouchers.
The same thing.
Could you make an exception because they had a voucher? And see, Kim said something else earlier, how we're using the funds. There were several people living in the Claymont Street apartments. They were out of those apartments due to the flood for months. And their funding, their HUD funding, was still being sent to the bank account of the owners of that building. And how we found that out is when they found a new place to live and they were presenting their information for their voucher, the landlord was being told, your rent is being sent somewhere else. They won't pay your current rent where you are. So we had to do a whole investigation. I put it out on the table to the necessary people. We'll look into it. It took months, but they have been out of that apartment building since September. We're talking February, March. The money from the HUD is still going to the owners of that building's account. How can that be?
Yeah.
Folks,
Oh my
are
God.
folks are upset with me because I don't go snooping in people's business just to do that. But when I have a lady who just came from a flood, was evicted, living in a hotel, now she found a new place and she's getting 5-day letters and about to be evicted again because her rent is going to someone where she's not living. That's an issue. That's an issue. Who is watching over this money?
That's right.
So if I could just ask, the common denominator here for what we're talking about this evening seems to be handling emergency situations. We had the flood, we had the Adams Street evictions. We now have a forecast emergency of 436 households. I mean, we couldn't predict the flood. We may not have been able to predict Adams Street, although anybody who knew anything about codes and inspections would have been able to assume something like that was going to happen. We certainly know what's going to happen with those 436 families. So if we are looking at these emergency situations that require extraordinary action and coordination, case management, et cetera, who should be, and that there are different agencies, different individuals, different groups involved, who needs to be involved in the discussion to put together a process or a program
Another process.
that works?
Well, I can tell you what we're trying to do for this forecasted one with the 436 households, which include lots of kids. So we're expecting it to be about 1,500 to 2,000 people. What we're trying to do is, one, coordinate a conversation with the State Service Center folks they have the list, they know exactly where these folks are, they know their situations better at this point. And so we're coordinating a call with them. And then we're coordinating calls in each county with the folks who have the most experience with the services that are available in each of those counties, so that we can ensure that we're maximizing opportunity on getting these folks connected. As many of you know, there's not emergency shelter anywhere other than really Newcastle County. There are some shelter options, but we really don't have walk-in shelters for people. So trying to make sure that there is a place for folks to go. And so conversations are actively happening. Ideas are starting to come to the surface, which is, we have 3 weeks. That's better than having come after the fact. But when you're talking this many people, when we're already under significant stress, it's going to be very difficult. Who I'm not trying to actively involve in these conversations are state legislators. I don't think that's going to do very much right now, because it takes too much time and effort. And where is the funding going to come from? Because it's federal funding that is ending. So we're really trying to work with the social service, human service agencies in each of the counties to coordinate an effort to make sure that we're maximizing it. So that's what French House is actively doing now. Lynn? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, thanks. I would think AJ Shaw, who is the one who is the state level director of emergency services, I would think that he should be taking responsibility. But since I've never seen the emergency plan, and I think Stacey has tried to ask for it and was told it's not public or something like that, I don't know what are considered emergencies that fall within his purview. So maybe an upcoming housing, emergency where you have 400 plus families who are going to be homeless, maybe that doesn't qualify as an emergency for the way his responsibilities are defined. That may be part of the problem in identifying who's in charge, is how do you define an emergency? Does this qualify? Does that put AJ Shaw in charge or not?
It's John Birno. Some years ago, I went on a tour of the emergency center, which is close to Smyrna, right next to Delaware One. And fascinating tour. They actually had an emergency center in there. But the emergencies they're worried about is a nuclear plant across the river blowing up or a hurricane. Those are emergencies. Now,
Right.
if a nuclear plant doesn't blow up, they do something else. And also, it's basically an empty building. If the plant were to blow up, they would depend on Delmarva Power and other people to send people into their building to do something. So at least some years ago, that was the emergency in Delaware and how it was managed. And maybe it's better now, I hope.
I don't know. I mean, I do know that COVID qualified as an emergency that AJ Shaw had responsibility for. So, it definitely can go outside of those natural disaster or man-made nuclear disaster type things. But I really don't know what that definition is. I mean, I think one thing that we could do is request or insist on getting some sort of public-facing document that tells the public who's responsible for what, and what are the emergency plans. I certainly haven't directly tried to request that, but I think it's worth doing.
Who would we request it of?
I think we would start with AJ Shaw.
Okay.
I mean, Wilmington, when it comes to like Ida and Adam Street, Wilmington also has its own emergency response person. But again, it's not clear exactly what they think they're responsible for, and that person has, in both cases, proven to be ineffectual.
Well, in fact, I made 2 contacts with the city, one with the city and one with the mayor's office, to see if representatives might join us this evening and talk about this situation, and did not get any return calls.
Wow.
So I guess they're very busy.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think Stacey really needs to take cover because there's a
Oh,
very
the storm.
serious
Yeah,
storm
yeah.
with
I would
hail
agree.
predicted.
I
Please.
It's beautiful out here, but I heard the thunder. Thank you.
Yes, and we really are coming close to the end of our time, but I think the real challenge, I thank you, Stacey and Kim, my goodness, and Lynn, the heroic work that you have done to try to make a meaningful difference in the lives of people who are struggling with this through absolutely no fault of their own, and who do not have the wherewithal or the resources to adapt and act and make things happen. This is the work we are called to do. And we need to figure out who to contact, how to engage, what to do to elevate the importance of this. I mean, these are fellow children of God,
Yes.
people who need our help. And we have contacts and we have capability, and it is incumbent on us to figure out how to make this work. So I cannot thank Stacey enough, and Kim, of course. I wish I had a clearer picture of where to go next. And maybe we need some follow-up conversation about what next steps might potentially be the most effective, but we can't just let it stop with the information that you all have shared tonight, because clearly it has happened before, it's about to happen again, and it will happen again after that. And if we allow this situation to continue, then shame on us.
And I just want to say thank you. You all have been a tremendous support to Friendship House since day one, 35 years ago. But
Indeed.
when the call is there, you respond, and it's just amazing. We could not have stepped in and helped the way we did without the financial support of your congregation. So just thank you very, very much for always being there when we need you to be there.
And I also like really want to thank Kim. I want to thank Lynn. I want to thank the church. I want to thank the congregation for listening, because when these things were happening, again, I've never, ever done anything like this in my life. But each time I would have a conversation with factual information down to a forum that we had where it wasn't just my voice you heard the voice of the people. You guys never let me down. Sometimes I was off in tears or whatever, but you listened and you supported anything that you could help me with. And even this call tonight, when Lynn asked me about it, I said, sure, because no one's talking about what needs to happen. I'm going to continue to work with these families and do whatever it is that I can do that's within my strength and my power. But this is a larger situation than I could ever handle. And especially what Kim just was saying about the 400 and some families and people that are going to be out at the end of the month. And I really don't want to see us have to go through anything like we went through with Ida and Adams. And we as a people, these are God's children and God's mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles. And we have the authority, just our voice and our prayers, to get to the people who need to listen and do something different. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate you all. I love you.
I just want to say you are angels for these people, and thank you for all you've done on their behalf.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for being here this evening. I hope everyone who has been here and has heard this story will speak up and share what you've heard, share what you've learned. If you have any contacts, if you have any ideas, any thoughts, but this circumstance, the situation needs to be shared, needs to be understood so that action is taken. It's unconscionable that this would happen over and over and over again.
That's
So
right.
thank you again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Be safe, everyone.
Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.
Bye then.
See.